Welcome to session number 2, Teaching the Digital Native. I always like to start these sessions by kind of explaining how they came about. So the session you're about to see was made using Google Slides, and then I threw those Google Slides into Explain Everything, which is kind of the do-all whiteboard screen recording tool. Without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the session. And here we go. So as always, there are some requirements to completing this course. Step 1, watch the video, which of course, if you are seeing my face right now, of course, that's what you're doing. The second, I've included a couple of video links on Schoology that just kind of reiterate and give another kind of form or topic on the digital native and 21st century learning, which we're going to talk about here as this session gets going. Step 3, this is going to be kind of the piece that's the biggest part. We're going to use an app called Flipgrid. So if you have not used that before, you're going to need to create a login. The course code is going to be provided on Schoology, as well as some instructions on how to use Flipgrid. It's a pretty self-explanatory app. It allows you to do video-based discussion. So rather than just the normal kind of discussion post, we're going to turn this over to a video type discussion because it kind of goes along with the theme and the topic that we're going to talk about with the digital native. Don't forget that after you complete this session, before you turn in any hour sheet, your orange slip needs to be signed. That is true for any session that you complete. Your orange slip needs to come through me first. So when you get those completed, either drop them off in my mailbox or catch me sometime this summer or when school starts, and we'll get you credit for these classes that you complete. And step number 5, be awesome, which I know if you're watching this video, you already are. So let's get rock and rolling with teaching the digital native. All right, well, we're gonna kind of start with an overview of what this session is going to include. So some of the things we're gonna talk about and just kind of cover, briefly here in this video session is, the first one we're gonna talk about is what defines a digital native. Now, you're also going to see it referred to as a 21st century learner. You're going to see a lot of the 21st century school, 21st century learner, digital native, all those things are going to kind of come up in this session, all kind of meaning the same thing. So we're first going to talk about like what defines a 21st century learner. To go with that, we're also going to talk about any misconceptions there are when it comes to the idea of a digital native and kids who have had that experience with technology. So we're going to talk about some misconceptions and just kind of some narrative around those types of students. Then we're going to talk about what schools should look like. So we're going to kind of just look at different ideas of how school has been kind of constructed over the course of time, and maybe how we can shift our thinking about how schools should operate and classrooms should operate. And finally, we're going to look at some specific tools and strategies for the classroom. Now, these are going to be very basic and general. We're not going to talk about anything subject specific. We're going to talk more just ideas on how to maybe reach more students and how to operate a classroom. These are going to be, very brief, very general kind of ideas, but hopefully they will kind of spark some interest and spark kind of that make that connection with you as you prepare for your upcoming classroom. So we're going to start off by talking about what defines a digital native. So Mark Prensky was the guy who kind of coined this phrase, and he came up with it in 2011. And he defines a digital native as someone who is brought up during the age of technology and is very familiar with internet and just kind of grew up with that experience. Now, that typically, if you think about, students, is pretty much everybody in our school. Generation, it's kind of everybody from pretty much birth through about college age students. Now, there is kind of some flexibility within that, and we're going to talk about kind of some scenarios and situations where, people might or might not be digital natives. So we'll talk about that kind of as this session unwinds. Now, the opposite or of a digital native would be somebody they call a digital immigrant. This is somebody who did not grow up during that age. They've kind of had to learn technology as they go. They might still have really strong technology skills, but those were skills that they had to more learn and grasp as they go. Typically, the way I like to think about it is anybody from the early 90s, anybody who has seen the two images there, the house phone or AOL Instant Messenger, they're probably not a digital native. They have not, those were technologies that, if you showed kids now, they would have no idea what they're talking about. Now, there is some kind of, I wouldn't say controversy, but there's some debate about digital natives and whether they truly exist. Not all students automatically grow up being really good at technology, and we're gonna kind of talk about that in the misconceptions. But just because a student grew up in this technology era does not mean that they're automatically technology savvy. They don't know how to code. They don't know how to do a lot of different things. It's still a lot of learned skills, and we're gonna kind of dig into that topic a little bit here in our misconceptions. So like we were kind of talking about, we're gonna dive into some misconceptions about digital natives and the idea that of all these students that came up with all this technology and have been exposed to it their whole life. The first one that I kind of already touched on, but I think it's the most important because I find myself even doing it sometimes, is I automatically assume that students and young kids are good at technology. Now it's true that students have that ability to do some very basic things like searching things on YouTube and playing simple games, operating iPads. Typically students are pretty good at that. But you really think about the skills that a lot of times we want from students in school. We want them to be able to, whether it's finding a resource, research or resources, or creating something on their iPad, or just there's a lot of things that we kind of just take for granted that we assume students can do because they've always had iPads and they've always had this technology that might not automatically be true. What I found is a lot of the skills that, we find very important in the education setting still need to be taught. Even though students, have had this exposure to technology, they still need to learn the specific tools and skills that are really, really important for the education setting. The second one that I think I hear a lot about, students in this digital era is they have bad or inferior social skills. People just kind of see students and they always have those noses down in the cell phones or their tablets or iPads or whatever the case is. We just assume that they're, they don't really have those social skills. Now, every student in every case is going to be different, and you're going to see that, with every one of these things that we're going to talk about. There are, situations where that is true and where that's not true. But for the most part, you think about kids and the way they operate, their social skills, a lot of times are strong. They're always connected with each other. We, when I was growing up and when teachers and stuff were growing up, all the interaction was face-to-face. The things like internet and instant messaging was just kind of getting going as I was getting into school. So much of the interaction and the social skills came from the face-to-face. Students now are interacting all the time. You think about all the social media they're on, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all those things, those are building social skills just in kind of a different way. And that's going to be something, you're going to hear me talk about too. A lot of the skills that, we think that were important to us as we were growing up just kind of look different to the kids now. Social skills being one of those things. And that kind of going with that, poor writing skills. Now again, every situation is going to be different. You're going to have kids that do have poor writing skills, and you're going to have some that have great writing skills. But think about, the students today and the way they write to each other. Now, their language kind of looks almost a little bit different now in the world of Snapchat and Twitter and Instagram, where you have, kind of that limited space. The way they construct their writing is certainly going to be different, but that doesn't make it any less, I don't know what the right word is, any less correct. I mean, it's still one of those things, one of those skills that they're almost writing in this age more than they probably have been in the past. It just looks very different, and we have to be able to take that writing skills that students probably do have, but we have to foster it to make it look like we want it for the education setting. And the second to last one there, multitaskers. Now we kind of think that students are bad at multitasking, and now to some extent that is true, and I myself am guilty of being a poor multitasker. I was reading, and one of the terms that I thought was kind of interesting that described kind of the new way of multitasking is technotasking. So much of that technology, when you're on your cell phone and you're supposed to be listening, you're supposed to be working on something, and you're viewing the web, those skills, are ones that will develop in students, and some students do have, a good ability to be able to, be online and still get things accomplished, or, maybe be on a tablet or device and still be able to listen and comprehend. So we sometimes just kind of take for granted that students are bad at multitasking, but there are some students that, do have those skills and will continue to develop. And the last one there I hear a lot about too is a short attention span. Now, again, like I said, every case is different. There are certainly any number of students that have a super short attention span. I think you can go to any classroom and pick out those ones right away. Oh, look, squirrel. But really, there are students that have the ability to listen. I think a lot of it comes down to kind of the way we look at school and the way we look at learning. When we're forced to, kind of sit and listen for longer periods of time, that's when that attention span issue kind of comes out into play. And that's going to be one of the things we talk about as we talk about what school looks like to the 21st century learner, to the digital native, and how we can kind of shape those things to better fit, their skill set. Because there are a lot of, really good things that digital natives have going for them, a lot of good skills, and we have to find a way to utilize those skills in the education setting. When I think of, digital natives and the students that we have right now, one of the first words that kind of comes to my mind is connected. Students, they're connected to each other and they're connected to the outside world, really 24/7, 365. Now, a lot of times we automatically kind of associate that with, being a bad thing. Students are always on their phones, they're always on, the internet doing whatever. They're Snapchatting, they're, social media, all those things. And we automatically assume that's a bad thing. But think about all the opportunities that provides for students to connect with their friends, to connect with what's going on in the world, to see, what's happening outside of just, their small town or wherever they're living in. And think about the opportunities. If you think about a teacher, think about all the opportunities that those things provide as a teacher, and all the experiences that we could be able to share and be able to see because students can be connected to each other and they can be connected to other parts of the world. So the idea of, the connected student is really something that we want to be able to embrace. We want to be able to allow students to connect with each other, to connect with other people. And we have to be able to help them develop those skills and develop those and provide them opportunities to be able to do that. And I think that's, as we talk about, a 21st century skill, one of the things that we are going to kind of focus on. And in addition to connected, one of the things that I found that kind of drives students is FOMO, so the fear of missing out. If you ask any kid what, if they see something's going on at, whether it's social media or they hear about it, that's one of the things that really drives students is that fear of missing out. And that's just, I think that's important to understand when you think about students in the digital age, that those are the things that drive them, and those are the things that motivate them too. So kind of switching gears here, you think about students and they've always been connected via the internet, iPads, cell phones, whatever. We think about the skills that they have and they possess. One of the things that kind of jumps out to me right away, and I'm guilty of doing this, and I kind of hinted at this earlier. So if they've always had the internet, why can't they find what they need? Whether I, give something I want students to kind of look at, or try to search or find, and I automatically just assume, yeah, they're going to be able to find that. They know how to Google, they know how to search. A lot of times that's a skill that really needs to be taught and developed, and I've heard that kind of all the way up through high school students. The researching skills, those types of things are things that we still want to continue to develop and work on. So that kind of brings to my last point here is, so what kind of skills do we need to be teaching students, these digital natives, what kind of skills do they have, and what kind of skills do they need, and how does this impact our teaching and our learning? So that's going to be kind of our next focal point here is what next? We know what these students can do. Now, how can we do those things in the school setting? All right, so now that we've kind of talked about, what a digital native is and kind of the strengths and the skill sets that those students, possess, we're going to kind of shift our thinking to more of the approach of schools and how, teachers and students and the whole district as a whole can kind of shift the way we go about, traditional school. I am going to preface this by saying, I'm going to talk about some different ways that things may have done in the past, or different strategies and different lesson, delivery methods. There is kind of a time and place for everything. Whether it's lecture, there's always going to be a time for when a teacher just needs to kind of deliver information and make sure that students are getting the content that they need. So there's always kind of that time and place for all of these things. Let me just, we'll start with the first couple here. The idea of student-centered versus teacher-centered. So teacher-centered is kind of the old, I wouldn't say old school, but it's the older style of, the teacher stands in front, delivers all the content, the students, are required to kind of sit and listen and take in that information. Versus maybe more of a student-centered approach where, the students are responsible for more of what goes on. There's more collaborative work, they kind of learn from each other as they go. The teacher acts more as a facilitator. They kind of, pop it around from group to group, helping maybe in different directions. And that's, there are going to be a lot of kind of pros and cons to both sides there. But when we talk about the 21st century learner, the kids, one of the things that they do have, we talked about those social skills and the ability to kind of, learn from each other and be able to connect. That idea of student-centered probably fits their mold a little bit better. Now that does provide some difficulty in the classroom setting. There's more stuff going on. There's more ability, to get off task, and there's definitely some management pieces that kind of go along with that. And like I said, there's always a time when, more of the teacher-centered approach is necessary. It's required, and so we certainly don't want to just abandon that philosophy altogether. Some of the other things when you think about, digital natives and students is the flexible versus traditional seating. So many people now are looking at the idea of flexible seating and the comfort and the idea of allowing students more choice and more freedom over where they sit and how they finding a place that they best learn is definitely something that, a school approach to these digital natives definitely is something we want to kind of keep in the back of our mind. One of the other things too, that as a technology and as digital natives, so much of what the students are good at right now is the ability to create. That creativity piece, a lot of people think, students are becoming less and less creative. To some extent that is true, but their creativity is really shifting. If you give students the ability to use some of the tools and programs that an iPad provides, there's so many ways for them to kind of show their creativity, but it might not be that kind of one size fits all approach. It might be, somebody being able to create, music or create a video. So many students are good at that now. They're videotaping everything. Comic books, there's so many different ways to create versus just that traditional of consumption of, I hear something and then I do this worksheet or I do this, test or whatever. That's more of the consumption. A lot of the students' strengths fall into that creative ability, and so we want to be able to find ways to play to those student strengths. And I think keeping the idea of creating versus consuming would definitely be something we want. The other one too, activities versus lectures. Again, there's always a time and place for both. There's certainly not one right answer in this category, but you really got to think about the needs of your learners and where we can find ways to kind of get them up, get them moving, and do different things. And I think that would really benefit digital natives and students altogether. So those are just some kind of general things. We're going to talk about some more specific things on what to implement in a classroom. So that'll be coming up here in just a minute. When I think about the school's approach, and one of the questions I asked earlier is, what skills do students really need? I think of digital citizenship and the new kind of life skills that students need differently, and I think about the importance that they play in students' lives, and maybe why those skills we should look to incorporate in school. So digital citizenship is the idea of teaching good online behavior. There's a really good quote there at the top. We can't tell our students not to use social media or just be careful and then put our heads in the sand. Instead, we need to teach them how to be safe and responsible digital citizens, because they're going to be using it anyways. And that quote is from Professor Sylvia Duckworth. And I think back to George Kiros when we had him here this spring, and he talked about, one of the things one of the quotes he had in his presentation is involving social media. A student said, you can't just throw us in the pool and expect us to swim. You need to be able to kind of teach us that. And I think that's so true. You think about the topics that digital citizenship provides, and you think about what you hear in the news right now, what is so popular. Things like information privacy. How many times is information being stolen and on not secure places? Digital safety, news credibility, source credibility. That obviously with the presidential thing is definitely huge. And just an overall respect and responsibility. You think about what is going on in our world right now. Those are probably the topics that are high up. And you think about school and educating young people to be good, responsible citizens. Those are the topics, some of the biggest topics that I think students really need to learn from a young age. How do I protect my information? How do I be safe online? How do I, show respect and responsibility online? Those types of things I think are really important. And when you look at these digital natives, it's only going to continue to get more and more involved. And so it's going to be important that they have those skills. And I think that's why those skills are important for a school and for educators to be able to provide. It may not always be, that structured technology time where this is what they learn. There are other ways within classrooms to talk and to bring up those ideas and to really help students understand the magnitude that these digital citizenship skills have. And you think about life skills and think about where our world has gone, even in the past 10 years. I just kind of put two things side by side here to kind of think about which one of these skills is really important for students to need. What's going to be more important to students, sending a professional sounding email or a persuasive letter? I can't tell you the last time I wrote a letter to somebody asking them to do something, but I send no less than 20 emails a day, and it's going to be those skills about how to sound professional and how to approach email. I think, again, one of those things we just take for granted. We think students will know how to do that. Well, those are skills that they need to learn, and what better time than when they're in school. Another one, for myself teaching third grade, cursive versus coding. The idea of cursive, is still kind of out there a little bit. There's definitely some people that are hanging on to it, but outside of my name, again, it's one of those things, one of those skills I haven't used since I've been in school. Whereas coding, this language that, I have a whole session on, talk about how important it is and how many jobs are going to require some sort of coding skills and some sort of coding background. And it's one of those things that we don't necessarily teach mainstream yet, and maybe we should look at doing. And the last one, citing sources versus evaluating sources. I look at myself right now taking my master's class. I spend a lot of time working on citing sources, and of course, telling where my information came from is super important. There's no doubt about it. But I think about what's really important is evaluating my source. Is this a good source? Is this credible? Think about students, with what they read on social media and when they read stuff on Google. Is this information credible? That's really the skill that they need the most. Yeah, we want them to be able to cite sources because they're going to need that, X, Y, Z, but evaluating sources is going to be that life skill that I ultimately think probably would serve them better. So that's just kind of wrapping up the idea of how we should look at school and the digital native. Yeah. So as I was kind of doing some looking and some researching for this session, one of the frameworks that kept coming back up and kept coming back up and kept coming back up is the 4 C's for 21st century learners. And we've talked about 4 C's, kind of in the past. You might have heard them in a different session or in different places. But the more I think about it, the more I, start to lean towards this framework as, what do we really want our students to have? We want them to be good communicators. We want them to be able to work together. We want them to be able to think critically, and we want them to be creative. And those skills, I think, are ones that we want to find ways to develop. Those 21st century skills are so important. Those are the skills that students need to be successful in school, but in life as well. So the framework on the right side there just kind of shows the web and how everything kind of ties together. At the bottom, you have more of the school type, the learning environment, the professional development, curriculum and instruction, standards and assessment. That's kind of the framework, the background framework for 21st century learning. But if you think about, how students perceive, school, what types of things are they going to need? Obviously, you have your key subjects. Those subjects are never going to go away. I'm not advocating for, throwing out reading and bringing in digital citizenship. That framework is always going to be there. But how do we incorporate those learning and innovation skills, the 4 C's, in addition to teaching the life and career skills and the information media and technology skills? This framework was developed by a partnership. They looked at teachers, they looked at people in the business world, in universities, and they talked about what do we want from students? What types of skills and what types of things do we need from our workforce and from the young people, and it comes back to those 4 skills. So our job as educators is to how do we develop those skills? And so that's going to be kind of the last piece here that we're going to talk about is how do we develop these skills? And so hopefully some of the ideas that I have here will help you trigger one of the 4 C's for you in your classroom. All right, we're on kind of the last piece here. So we talked about the digital natives, what they are. We talked about misconceptions. We talked about what school should look like. How do we actually do something with this information? So what I've done is I've provided just kind of a list of things, to think about with students and to think about actually kind of with yourself and how we reach those 21st century learners, those digital natives. What can we do to kind of help provide them? Obviously, the first one is always going to be technology. I didn't even, include it in my list. Anytime we can, incorporate technology to kind of help spark things along is definitely going to reach and connect with those students. Again, it's not an end-all. Technology doesn't need to be a part of every single thing that they do. And likewise, just because something is on the iPad doesn't mean it's automatically going to interest them. Just because a worksheet is on the iPad doesn't mean it's any better than when it's on, a piece of paper. So some of the things, when I think about the digital native and some of the things I read about, one is providing choice. When you think about assessments and how do we assess learning, sometimes providing choice, whether it's, we talked about, students and the wanting to create. We don't have that one size fits all. Not having that one size fits all approach will really allow students to use the skills and the things that are most important to them or are their biggest strengths and use them to kind of their advantage to show their learning, document their learning. So anytime you can provide students choice over assessment pieces or what they're learning is definitely a good thing. Some of the other ideas would be the ability to self-pace. Again, the not one size fits all approach. Every student has different needs, and trying to meet those needs as best as possible is something, I hope as educators we all strive for. You got some students who are super fast, some students who need a lot of repetition. Maybe somebody who needs to see something done multiple times could watch a video over, maybe it's something like adding fractions. If they just watched a bunch of videos of somebody adding fractions, they would get it. Maybe somebody needs a lot of practice. They've seen it, they kind of know how to do it, they just need that practice. And maybe you got some kids who just need you. If you allow and open up more opportunities for students to self-pace. You can kind of provide yourself to students who maybe need you the most. We've already talked about it, the opportunity to create. Students have a lot of creativity. You just kind of got to push them in the right way, but you also got to show them, kind of how to get started, and whether it's an app or a program or something, don't just assume that they automatically know how. You kind of got to guide them as well. You all know students and digital natives are big media consumers. There's no better resource than YouTube. Again, we automatically assume kids are on YouTube all the time, and they are, but a lot of times they're just watching those funny cat videos or some Fortnite videos or whatever the kids are watching these days. But there are a lot of really good things on YouTube for students to be watching too, and things that can be beneficial in the education setting. So getting kids to consume the media in the right way, in the ways that are helpful to us, would definitely be a positive there. And again, the other kind of things too, working together. I think that pretty much goes without saying. Students like the opportunity to work together, to work in groups, to kind of share their thinking. It helps students who maybe aren't as strong or aren't as confident, and be able to do kind of the other work too. And the last two, I think, are for students are kind of big ones that I've started to kind of look at in my own classroom. Share what we find, whether it's something that we learned about or something that, just even in our own day. Students love to share, and they love to, kind of tell people, and they love to be proud of the things that they've done. So we have to provide that platform to be able to, for students to be able to do that. And the last one too is be social. Sometimes we think social media kind of gets a bad rap, but there's so many ways to spread positivity and good things with kids and with what's going on at our school, that being social, it has a lot of benefit to it, and something we want to look at as well. And so shifting focus here as we look at ourselves as teachers, what can we do to reach those digital natives? Build the relationships. Use that technology to be able to kind of use it to your advantage. There's so many ways that we can use that to build relationships, strengthen relationships, by connecting with those students. And some other things too, be forward thinking. You think about these students need, and what types of things are coming out in front of them as they graduate at high school and start working and going to college or whatever. Just because we've done something one way doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way. Be forward thinking, think about what's truly important for students, and with that, be able to embrace the change. Roll with the punches, new technology, new schedule, whatever the change is. As teachers, we always have to be flexible. Just embrace that change, and whatever it is, just jump in, head start. And with that, of course, take risks. Using technology and reaching those digital natives isn't going to come up without some risk. You can't be hesitant. You just got to be able to jump right in. Sometimes we're going to fail, but we know that sometimes the more we learn comes from stuff that doesn't work out. So, and the last one there is the ability to reflect. So think about what happened in a day, in a week, in a month. What types of things went well? What can we improve upon for ourselves and for students? And I think that is really important with digital natives and with 21st century learning, that we take that time to reflect and to just kind of think about the good things and how to continue to improve. So, all right, so we've reached the end of this session. Again, hopefully you can kind of take something out of this session. When you think about digital natives, and we talked about the approach of what our school should look like, or what types of things are truly important. Again, like I said, it's not a one size fits all. So hopefully there was something there that kind of made a connection to you, and you can think about for the upcoming year. So finally, just make sure there's a couple things you need to do. Number one, go watch the videos in Schoology. Number two, download and sign into Flipgrid. Number three, post a discussion reply. Number four, get your gold sheet signed. And number five, that's it. Have a great day.